Hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever tModNews mod review. For the first episode I had to choose a very good mod, of course, and what better mod to start with than the Split mod. I plan on doing more reviews in the future. Leave the mod you want to see reviewed next in the comments. Also, keep in mind that this is the first review I've ever made, so it will not be perfect. Leave your feedback in the comments so I can work on it in future parts. In this review I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm gonna start by talking about the items. After that I'm gonna talk about the enemies, the bosses and the friendly NPCs the Split mod adds. And last I'm gonna talk about some randomly generated structures. Let's start with the items. The Split mod adds a ton of unique weapons that are very satisfying to use and they look very cool. Almost all of the weapons I tried work totally different from each other, as you can see by the footage. There aren't a lot of mods that make almost every weapon unique, and I think the Split mod does it very well. The weapons also look really cool, although almost all mods have good sprites, so that isn't really special. It is still nice and I thought I should at least mention it. There are also some weapons with unique sounds and I always love that. It just shows the developers really wanted the weapons to feel unique, not only gameplay wise, but they also wanted them to sound unique. The Split mod also adds some fun and unique and creative accessories, such as the Avenger mask, which is sold by the Witch Doctor and gives you +3 defense. Plus, the less health you have, the harder the minions you summon will fight for you. Or for example, the Enchanted Arrow, which is sold by the Librarian, which is an NPC the Split mod adds, but I'll talk more about that later. The Enchanted Arrow allows the player to right click with a bow to release magic arrows, and they pass through enemies and deal twice as much damage. Or for example, the Ring of Sun. It is an accessory that makes your healing potions more efficient by increasing the amount of health restored when drunk. The mod also adds some new ammo you can use, such as the tracing arrows. These arrows function like chlorophyte bullets, and for example the Dragon Slayer arrows, which create copies of themselves when they hit an enemy. As for armor stats, the Split mod is a bit lacking. There are only 2 armor stats, the Gravekeeper set and the Stargazer set. The Gravekeeper set increases summon damage by 9% and it increases your max number of minions. And the set bonus increases your max number of minions even more. The Stargazer set increases the maximum amount of mana you have by 80, and it also reduces the mana cost by 20%. But that's not all. It also increases the damage of magic weapons by 20%. The set bonus makes this cool rainbow trial appear behind the player, as you can see in the footage. Now let's talk about NPCs, enemies and bosses. First, let's talk about the enemies. The Split mod adds a lot of enemies. Too much to cover them all, so I will just go over some that I found interesting. I'm not going to talk about the items the enemies drop, I'm just going to show the enemies. So the first enemy I wanted to show is the Colossus. It is an enemy that only spawns during the blood moon, and it uses 2 attacks. If the player is close, he will strike the ground with his stone club, creating a small shockwave. If the player character is far away or in the air, Colossus will shoot a damaging laser from his eye. In addition, the Colossus doesn't damage on contact, so it's much easier to kill him in close combat. If you kill him while he's using the laser beam attack, he drops a lance, which I think is a very nice detail. Now next let's talk about the Gargoyle. The Gargoyle appears in the blood moon with a random monster or boulder and throws it at the player. It then flies away to get the next object to throw at the player. Now let's talk about the Whisperer. The Whisperer is a flying enemy that spawns in the underground hollow. It charges a projectile and then shoots that projectile at the player. And when the projectile hits the player's movement is reversed. And the last enemy I want to talk about is the Shadowcaster. The Shadowcaster is an enemy that appears on the surface during the night and summons husks. When it dies, it spawns a funky soul, which you can catch with a bug net. And if you manage to catch the funky soul with a bug net, you get the poor unfortunate soul. In expert mode, as you can see in the footage, the Shadowcaster has a soul bat on a chain. Now, these are not all the enemies in the mod, of course, there are still a lot more, but I suggest you play the mod yourself and discover them. Now, one of the coolest things about every mod are of course the bosses, and the Split mod doesn't disappoint. The first boss you will fight is the Spirit. She is an early game boss, and you summon her by using the Shadow Locket at night. As you can see in the footage, the Spirit flies above the player and uses a couple of attacks with her scissors. When she is nearly dead, she will reveal her face because her hood is destroyed. I also like when you summon her again, she will say, "Ah, here we go again." That's a nice touch. Now another boss you will fight pretty early on in the game, in the mid pre-hard mode phase, is the one-shot. Now one-shot you can summon by using the snow beacon in the snow biome, and he occasionally teleports to a random place after attacking and executes a new attack. There's another version of the one-shot that you can fight in the stranded ship biome. The stranded ship biome is a biome the split mod adds, but we'll talk more about that later. Now the next boss is the Commando. After defeating the Wall of Flesh, Commando will hide inside a random town NPC. You can deduce which NPC he is by listening to the others. Using either a water gun or a slime gun on a possessed NPC will reveal the Commando and start a boss fight. I think that is such a creative idea for a boss fight. Because yeah, you never expect it, but when you talk to the NPCs you see that they have like dialogue suggesting that one of them is a Commando. Oh, and when you defeat him, he will also move in as a town NPC. Now let's talk about one of the coolest bosses I've ever seen in the Terraria mod, the Mirage. The Mirage is an early hard mode boss, which is intended to be fought alongside the mechanical bosses. You summon her with the strange communicator. Mirage teleports around the player, unleashing various magic attacks. I think this is such a cool boss because of the awesome sprite and animations, but I'll talk more about that later. And last but not least, Insurgent. Now Insurgent is a mid-hard mode boss that can be fought after obtaining all 3 souls of the mechanical bosses. Now I'm gonna be honest, the fight is kinda disappointing if you ask me. It is still an amazing boss fight, no doubt, but if you compare it to the other bosses in the mod, it isn't very special. I do love the animation when you kill him. Speaking of animations, all bosses have cool animations which makes a fight a lot more interesting than other fights. What I do miss about all these amazing boss fights is custom music tracks for the bosses, especially Mirage. I would love to hear a magic song like Dementio's theme from Super Paper Mario or something. Now before I'm gonna talk about the structures, let's talk about the friendly NPCs the split mod adds. The split mod adds quite a lot of unique friendly NPCs, so let's quickly cover them all. Let's first talk about the Librarian. The Librarian will appear when you defeat one-shot. He will defend himself with the sword, and he will sell some tomes that can be used as weapons and some other stuff. Another NPC is Gnoshi the Keeper. Gnoshi the Keeper will appear when the spirit has been defeated. He defends himself with Star Wrath projectiles and he sells some weapons and accessories, but his main ability is that he will exchange some special items for something else that can be turned into either an accessory or a weapon. Now let's talk about the Magician. The Magician will appear when, well, pretty obvious, Mirage has been defeated. He will defend himself with stars and he will sell some accessories and weapons, most of them magic related. The Pilgrim is another NPC the split mod adds, and he will appear when the Insurgent has been defeated. He can tell you how many times you've died and you can see how you died as well. He also sells some accessories and weapons, and he will defend himself with the Demon Broadsword. The Commando, like I said earlier, spawns when you defeat the Commando, which is the boss we just covered. He will also move in as an NPC. He attacks with a green orb projectile. And the last NPC is the Twilight Walker. The Twilight Walker will randomly appear in the underground Crimson or Corruption. He will not move into a vacant house. He sells a lot of stuff, such as the Armor of Chivalry, which is a Shovel Knight reference. And finally, let's talk about structures. The split mod only adds one custom biome, but is really fun to explore. It's called the Stranded Ship and it generates in the underground snow biome. The mini biome features its own unique tiles, backdrops, enemies, loot and music. In the biome you can find a few chests with unique loot, piles of coins and gems. The biome fits really well in Terraria, though the biome doesn't really change at all when you reach hard mode. It would be nice if they added 1 or 2 new items in the biome with unique drops, so there's a reason to visit the biome again. But that doesn't mean I dislike the biome at all. Like I said, it fits really well in Terraria, and it is a lot of fun to explore. In conclusion, the split mod is a fantastic mod that I think deserves even more attention than it already has. Real cool bosses, creative enemies, weapons with unique mechanics, a custom biome, custom music, the split mod adds it all. The developers are working on an update which will change almost everything the mod has right now. When the update launches, I will review the mod again to compare it with the items and enemies in the mod now. I quickly want to thank APSCP for letting me use footage from his video, and I also want to thank Dr. Hammer. He's one of the developers for the mod and he helped a lot with this video. Thank you for watching. Leave the mod you want to see reviewed next in the comments. Have a nice day.